Frankie Whitlow hadn't planned on stepping into her high school reunion looking like a hot mess, but of course, that's exactly what happened. "Great," she muttered, tugging her coat tighter around her thrift store dress as she stared at the glowing entrance of the ballroom. 10 years later, and I still can't afford decent mascara. The last time she'd walked these halls, it was in worn sneakers and a hoodie 2 sizes too big. Back then, she'd been the quiet girl in the back row, sketching in her notebook while secretly crushing hard on the boy with the easy laugh and the reckless smile, Sawyer Grant. She hadn't seen him since graduation, and honestly, she doubted he'd even show up. Guys like him, smart, charming, full of potential, didn't usually hang around. They went off to do big things. Not like her, struggling to pay rent and working double shifts at a local art supply store. Inside the ballroom, laughter echoed off the high ceilings. People were already halfway to tipsy, hugging, catching up, comparing lives. Frankie hovered by the entrance, trying not to look like she was casing the place for an exit. "Frankie." The voice hit her like a punch, low, smooth, familiar. She turned, and there he was, Sawyer Grant. But this wasn't the boy she remembered. This Sawyer was taller, broader, sharp in a tailored navy suit that fit like it was made for him, and maybe it was. His dark hair was slicked back in a way that looked accidental but definitely wasn't. And those eyes, still that same stormy gray, but older now, more intense. "Sawyer," he grinned, that same crooked grin that used to make her stomach twist in high school. "It's really you," she laughed awkwardly. "Wow, you, clean up. You look exactly the same," he said, eyes scanning her face like he was trying to memorize every inch. "But better." "Liar," she said, rolling her eyes, but her cheeks flushed anyway. They hugged. It was brief, but he smelled expensive, like cedarwood, leather, and something she couldn't name but wanted to bury her face in. "You flew in for this?" she asked, eyeing him. "Sort of," he said, smiling again. "I've got a place in the city now." "Oh, cool." "What do you do?" He paused just a split second too long. "I run a few businesses, tech stuff mostly." "Tech stuff," she repeated, raising a brow. "That sounds vague and suspicious," he laughed. "It does, doesn't it?" Before she could press more, someone called his name, dragging him away. He touched her arm lightly. "Don't go anywhere." And then he was gone. Frankie stood frozen, heart thudding. He remembered her, and he looked at her like she was someone worth remembering. She wandered toward the buffet, picking at crackers she couldn't pronounce. A few old classmates made small talk, but her mind stayed on Sawyer. He looked like he belonged in a magazine, wealthy, polished, way out of her league. He couldn't still be the same Sawyer. The one who used to sneak her extra fries in the cafeteria. Who once walked her home in the rain after she twisted her ankle in gym. The boy who never made her feel invisible, even when everyone else did. She was staring at a sad-looking shrimp cocktail when a voice whispered beside her ear, "You're still not eating shrimp, huh?" She turned. "You remember that?" He leaned in, grinning. "You said they looked like little sea bugs." "They do," she whispered, trying not to smile. "I miss that," he said, his voice quieter now. "You," Frankie's breath caught. Then one of the reunion organizers called for a group picture and he stepped back. "Come on." They stood next to each other in the photo and his hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. After the flash, he looked down at her. "You doing anything after?" She blinked. "Tonight? No," he said, grinning. "Next year," she laughed. "No plans, I mean, unless my cat suddenly needs me." "Come with me," he said. "I'll drive you home." "Is that a line?" "No," he said. "It's a car, a very nice one." She raised a brow as they walked out together. The valet pulled up a sleek black car that looked like it cost more than her entire apartment building. Frankie blinked. "That's yours. Still think I'm suspicious?" She got in, sinking into buttery leather seats. "I think you're hiding something." He glanced at her, one hand on the wheel. "Maybe I am." His place was in Midtown. The doorman greeted him by name. The elevator had no buttons, just a keycard. His penthouse opened to floor-to-ceiling windows, the skyline glittering like something out of a movie. Frankie froze. "You live here?" "Yeah," she turned slowly. "Sawyer." "Are you rich?" He leaned against the wall, watching her. "I'm doing okay," she blinked. "Define okay." He paused. I started a company after college, sold it a few years ago. I've invested in a few others since. So, you're a millionaire, he nodded once. Technically, yes. Her mouth opened, then shut. Why didn't you say anything? I didn't want you to look at me like everyone else does. She crossed her arms. How do they look at you? He walked toward her, eyes never leaving hers. Like I'm a number, a paycheck, a project, you. You looked at me like I was someone real back then. Like I mattered. Frankie swallowed hard. You still matter, she said, but I'm not the same girl. He stopped in front of her. Neither am I, but I think I'd still fall for the same girl. They stared at each other, the silence crackling. She looked away first. This is insane. He touched her hand. So stay, let's be a little insane tonight. She hesitated, then nodded. And for the first time in years, Frankie let herself stay. Frankie woke to the scent of dark roast coffee and something warm and buttery. For a moment, she forgot where she was until her gaze landed on the skyline outside the massive windows. Right. Sawyer's penthouse. She sat up slowly on the plush sectional, pulling the throw blanket tighter around her. Her dress from last night was wrinkled, her hair a tangled mess. And yet, the moment felt strangely peaceful. Her shoes were neatly placed beside the couch. A folded note sat on the coffee table, her name scrawled in sharp, confident handwriting in the kitchen. Against her better judgment, her heart flipped. She padded across the sleek floors, trying not to make noise. The open-concept kitchen was a masterpiece: glass, marble, and brushed steel. Sawyer stood at the stove, sleeves pushed up, flipping something on a skillet. He glanced over his shoulder. "Morning, Frankie." "Morning," she said, awkwardly tugging at the hem of her dress. "You cook." "I try. I figured you'd need something before you face the world again." She leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "I didn't exactly plan on falling asleep here." "You were exhausted," he said, setting a plate down. "I didn't want to wake you." She eyed the food, scrambled eggs, croissants, and fresh fruit arranged like it belonged on a hotel menu. "You do realize this is the second time you've surprised me in less than 24 hours. He set 2 mugs down and poured the coffee. "Do you always sound this suspicious before caffeine?" She took a sip and exhaled. "Okay, that's unfairly good." He watched her for a beat. "You always talk like that, like you're on guard." "I've had to be." Sawyer didn't press, but the weight of his silence made her feel exposed anyway. After a few bites, she spoke again. "So, what happened after high school?" He wiped his hands on a towel and leaned against the island. "I got a scholarship, studied software engineering, started my first company halfway through sophomore year." She tilted her head. "That's fast." "It didn't feel fast. It felt like sprinting through fire, but I got lucky. Right product, right investor, right time. And now you live in a penthouse and make gourmet breakfasts." His lips curved faintly. "It's not all eggs and city views." She hesitated. "Is there someone else?" "No, there was someone briefly, but she didn't really see me." Frankie nodded slowly. "I get that. Relationships weren't exactly high on my list. Art school was a mess. I dropped out my second year, been working ever since. I always thought you'd end up doing gallery shows." "Yeah, well," she said, shrugging. "Turns out talent and rent don't always get along." His gaze softened. "You're still drawing." "Sometimes, when I can afford sketch pads." He walked around the counter and stopped in front of her. "I don't like how that sounds." She looked up at him, heart thudding. "It's not your problem." "It could be." "Don't," she said quickly. "Don't make this some kind of charity case. I didn't come here for I know you didn't," he said, voice low. "But I'm not going to apologize for wanting to help someone I care about. You don't know me anymore." "Frankie," he said, stepping closer, "I knew you better than anyone, and I think the only difference now is you stopped letting people in." She blinked, caught off guard. The elevator chimed. Sawyer frowned. "I'm not expecting anyone." A moment later, a woman strode in through the private entryway, tall, blonde, designer heels clicking against the polished floor. "Of course," she said, breezing past them. "You're always entertaining someone, Vanessa," he said tightly. "This isn't a good time." Frankie stood frozen, unsure if she should hide behind the counter or throw the croissant at her. Vanessa's eyes swept over Frankie. "And who is this?" No one you need to meet, Sawyer said flatly. Vanessa turned to him, ignoring Frankie entirely. You still haven't signed the paperwork. The development project in Tribeca, we need your approval by Monday. I'll look at it later. She stepped closer than necessary. We're not partners anymore, but if you keep dragging your feet, I'll take it to the board myself. Sawyer's jaw tightened. I said I'll handle it. Vanessa gave Frankie one last glance. You always did have a thing for lost causes. Frankie's spine straightened. And you always did assume your opinion mattered. Vanessa's brows lifted. Charming. Once the elevator doors closed behind her, silence fell. Frankie turned to him. Ex-girlfriend, ex-business partner, he muttered. She thinks she's both. You've got a type then. He looked at her sharply. No, I don't. She picked up the coffee again. Well, that wasn't awkward at all. I didn't know she still had access to the elevator. You should probably fix that. Sawyer ran a hand through his hair. I will. I didn't want this morning to go like that. She leaned back against the counter. Me either. I meant what I said, Frankie. I don't care where you are now. I care about who you are. And who do you think that is? He stepped closer. The same girl who used to draw on the edges of her math tests, who loved thunderstorms and hated elevators. Who once told me the world felt too loud. Her throat tightened. You remember that? I remember everything. She couldn't look away from him. I don't want to be a project, you're not. You're the one thing I don't want to fix, I just want to be near. Her heart thudded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. I should go. I won't stop you, he said. But I hope you don't. She hesitated, then grabbed her shoes from the couch. He followed her to the door. Can I see you again? She looked up at him, torn. That depends. On what? On whether you're real, she said, or just something that looks good in the morning light. The door clicked shut behind her, and Sawyer stood staring at it like it had taken something vital with it. Frankie didn't return to her tiny apartment right away. Instead, she wandered down Fifth Avenue, the cold morning air slicing through her thin coat. The city was still shaking off sleep, its energy hushed but thrumming just beneath the surface. She clutched her bag tighter as her boots clicked along the sidewalk, her mind a whirl of too many thoughts she wasn't ready to face. Sawyer Grant. Millionaire. And still, somehow, the boy who used to doodle dragons in the margins of his notebooks beside her. She didn't know where to put that version of him. The man with a private elevator and a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a design magazine didn't fit inside her memories. He'd remembered things she'd long since buried. But what did it mean? She stopped inside a cafe she hadn't visited in years, the same one she used to hide in after skipping class, where they never asked questions and always kept the hot chocolate extra thick. She ordered it out of habit and slid into the booth by the window, her fingers curling around the ceramic cup as condensation fogged the glass. A man passed outside in a tailored overcoat, speaking into a headset, his steps brisk and purposeful. She watched as he disappeared into a black car that looked uncannily familiar, her stomach twisted. She wasn't built for that world. She could barely afford her subway card, let alone the kind of life that came with skyline views and ex-partners who wore perfume that cost more than Frankie's rent. She reached into her bag, pulling out her sketchbook. The pages were almost full, some drawings crisp and clean, others smudged with frustration. She flipped to a blank page and stared at it. Nothing came. The last time she'd filled a page without thinking was years ago. Back when she wasn't afraid of what her work said about her. Back when she still believed someone might see her art and see her. The bell above the cafe door chimed. She didn't look up until a shadow fell across her table. Is this seat taken? Her head snapped up. Sawyer stood there, hands in his coat pockets, face unreadable. What are you doing here? She asked, too stunned to move. I figured if I couldn't get you to stay, I'd come find you. She blinked. You followed me. I asked the valet where you might have gone. He remembered you mentioning this place on the ride over. She frowned. That's unsettlingly specific. I listen, he said simply. Frankie glanced down at her sketchbook, then back up. You really shouldn't be here. Why not? Because this is real life. And you don't belong in it. He slid into the booth across from her. You think I don't belong in real life? I think you've built a world so high above ground that you've forgotten what it's like to worry about things like rent or groceries or train delays. You think money makes me forget what it means to care. I think it makes it easier not to. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You think I haven't had days where I couldn't breathe from the pressure. Nights I couldn't sleep because I thought I was going to lose everything I built. She studied him, trying to separate the man in front of her from the boy she used to know. Then why pretend like none of it touches you? Because that's what people expect. Investors, clients, press, they all want the illusion I give them what they need, but with you, I don't have to. She looked away as the waitress brought him a coffee without asking. He offered a quiet thank you, then returned his attention to her. You left without saying goodbye, he said after a moment. I didn't think I owed one. I wasn't asking for closure, Frankie. I was asking for a chance. A chance at what? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. At something that doesn't feel like performance, at being with someone who knew me before any of this mattered. She didn't pull away, but her hand remained limp beneath his. There's a gap between us, Sawyer. When you don't see because you're used to people pretending it doesn't exist, then let me bridge it. You can't just throw money at it and expect it to go away. I'm not offering money, I'm offering time, space, you, she stared at him. You don't get to say that when you've spent the last 10 years building a life that doesn't include me. I didn't know where you went. You disappeared after graduation. I didn't think anyone would notice. I noticed, he said, voice rough. The silence stretched between them, full of things neither wanted to admit. Finally, she pulled her hand back. What do you even want from me, Sawyer? He took a long breath. I want to know you now, not just the girl from high school, the woman you are today, where you're going. What you dream about when no one's watching, I want all of it. She laughed once, bitter and soft. You say that like you're not going to wake up in a week and realize I don't fit into your world. Then help me build one we both fit in. She looked at him, really looked. The carefully pressed coat, the watch gleaming at his wrist, the calm certainty in his eyes. But beneath all of it, she saw something flickering and raw. Hope. You don't get to make promises you might not keep. I'm not making promises, he said. I'm taking a risk. She exhaled slowly. You don't even know if I'm someone worth falling for anymore. He leaned closer. I already am. The bell above the door rang again, but neither of them looked up this time. She closed the sketchbook. I need time, he stood. Take it. I'm not going anywhere. As he walked out, she stared at the page she'd been trying to fill earlier. Her pencil moved, and for the first time in years, the lines didn't feel forced. Frankie stepped off the elevator into the lobby of the gallery, her heels clicking softly against the white marble. The space buzzed with low conversation, the clink of champagne flutes, and the occasional swell of jazz from the live trio tucked into the far corner. Spotlights swept across canvases and sculptures, illuminating pieces from rising artists and one name that had shocked her when she saw it on the flyer, Frankie Whitlow. She still couldn't believe it. Her sketchbook, the one she barely had the courage to open just weeks ago, had become the centerpiece of a small but coveted corner of the exhibit. Framed selections lined the wall, raw and honest. A gallery owner Sawyer happened to know had reached out after he'd passed along her work without asking, which had led to one of the most heated arguments of her life. But somehow, she'd said yes. And now, her art was hanging on actual walls instead of being tucked into drawers. She adjusted the strap of her dress, deep plum silk, borrowed from a friend with better fashion sense, and scanned the room. Her stomach twisted. The last time she'd been in a crowd like this, she'd been invisible. Now people were glancing at her name tag, looking at her sketches, talking about her. She found a quiet spot near the back, beside a sculpture made entirely of melted spoons, and tried to breathe. Thought I might find you hiding near the cutlery, Sawyer said as he approached. She turned, trying not to smile. Don't you have a dozen investors to charm? They're not why I'm here. He looked different tonight, no tie, just the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone and a navy blazer that made his eyes look darker. She hadn't seen him in over a week, not since the cafe. They'd exchanged a few calls, all short. Careful, and then he'd sent her the gallery invitation with a single sentence written on the back. "Let the world see what I already do." She'd almost thrown it away. "Is this your version of a grand gesture?" she asked. "No, that comes later." She raised an eyebrow. "Later, I've got a plan." "But it depends on how brave you're feeling tonight." "I'm in a dress that costs more than my rent," she muttered. "I think I've reached my bravery limit." He glanced around the gallery, then leaned in. "Come with me." She narrowed her eyes. "You're not going to whisk me away in a helicopter, are you?" "No helicopters, just something I want you to see." She hesitated, then followed him through a side exit. The hallway was quiet, lined with track lighting and minimalist benches. At the end, a door opened to a rooftop terrace. The city spread out in all directions, glittering and endless. String lights hung overhead and a table sat near the edge, set for two, no one else in sight. She turned to him slowly. "Sawyer, you once told me you hated crowds but loved the view from above them." Her breath caught. She hadn't remembered saying that. He held out a chair. She sat, hands trembling slightly. "I wanted to give you this," he said, reaching into his coat and pulling out a small black folio. "It's a contract for your first solo show, different gallery, bigger space." "All on your terms." She stared at it, stunned. "You're serious?" "I've already stepped back. I'm not involved in the business side. I asked them to meet with you directly." "Why would you do this?" "Because I've spent the last decade building things that don't matter. And the one thing that always did, the one person I left behind." She looked down, overwhelmed. "You said you didn't want to be a project," he said quietly. "You're not. You're the future I forgot I wanted." She stood suddenly, walking to the edge of the terrace. The wind tugged at her hair and she looked out at the skyline, trying to steady herself. He joined her, hands in his pockets. "I don't care if you say no. I just needed you to know that I see you, not the girl you were, not the artist you might be, just you." She turned, eyes bright. "You're not making this easy." "I'm not trying to." She stepped closer. "What if I fall again? What if it hurts worse this time?" He reached for her hand. "Then I'll be right here, every part of me, no illusions, no walls." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him. It wasn't the kind of kiss that came from champagne or city lights or rooftop gestures. It was the kind that came from knowing someone had waited across years and silence and doubt. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I don't want to go back to who I was." "You won't have to." "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." They stood in the hush of the rooftop, the city around them alive, but for once not louder than the moment. Frankie reached for the folio and held it to her chest. "Okay," she whispered. He blinked, hopeful. "Okay," she smiled. "Let's see what happens when we stop running from the good stuff." Sawyer exhaled, then laughed, a low, warm sound that made her heart squeeze. He pulled a ring box from his jacket and opened it. "Too soon?" he asked. She stared at the diamond, a simple, elegant solitaire. She laughed through the tears pushing at her eyes. "You're unbelievable." "I've waited 10 years. One more second would be unbearable. Ask me the real question." He stepped closer, lifting the box between them. "Frankie Whitlow, will you build something with me that no one else could ever make sense of?" She nodded, eyes shining. "Yes. Absolutely yes." They kissed again, and this time the strings of lights above them blinked with the wind, the music from the gallery drifting faintly upward. Neither of them noticed. They were too busy falling for real this time. Frankie stood at the edge of the stone path, her heels sinking slightly into the soft grass. The estate grounds stretched endlessly around her, rolling green, trimmed hedges, and lanterns flickering to life as dusk fell. The scent of blooming lavender drifted through the air, and soft violin music floated from the tent set up near the terrace. Sawyer had said it would be small, just family, close friends, and a few colleagues who'd seen them grow into this odd, beautiful thing neither of them had planned for. But standing there, watching the guests mingle in formal wear beneath strings of crystal lights, Frankie felt like she had stepped into one of those dreams that used to feel too big for her to touch. She turned as the sound of gravel crunching signaled someone approaching. "You're not hiding, are you?" Nora asked, adjusting the wrap over her shoulders as she joined her. "I'm appreciating," Frankie answered, her voice quiet. "Big difference." Nora gave her a look. "You used to talk about this stuff like it belonged to another species," Frankie laughed softly. "It kind of did, until now." Nora slipped a glass of champagne into her hand, then glanced around. "He's pacing by the fountain, by the way." Frankie raised an eyebrow. "Sawyer." "Nervous? Like a man who's about to jump off a cliff and hopes he remembered his parachute. I told him he didn't need to do all of this, which is exactly why he did." Frankie took a sip of the champagne, then squared her shoulders. "Okay, let's do this." The garden had been transformed. Instead of a traditional aisle, clusters of white roses and golden lanterns lined a curved path that led straight to a small platform draped in soft linen. Frankie walked slowly, her hand gripping the bouquet Sawyer had sent to her suite that morning: wildflowers, delicate sprays of honeysuckle, and a single deep violet bloom tucked in the center. When she reached the platform, Sawyer turned. He wore a charcoal suit with a dark vest and no tie, his hair tousled in a way that couldn't possibly have been accidental. But it was his expression that made her breath catch a quiet reverence, as if he couldn't believe she was real. He stepped forward and took her hand. "Before you say anything," she whispered, "if you pull out another surprise, I swear I'm throwing you in that fountain." He chuckled, but his thumb brushed over her knuckles like he was grounding himself. "No surprises. Just you, me, and a few witnesses who are desperately hoping we don't mess this up." The officiant began, and the ceremony unfolded like something from another lifetime: gentle, warm, tethered by laughter and the kind of stillness that only came when two people had already weathered the worst of their doubts. When it came time for their vows, Sawyer stepped closer. "I spent so long chasing things that didn't mean anything," he said, his voice steady but quiet. "And then one night, you walked back into my life and reminded me what it felt like to be seen. I don't care where we go or what happens next, Frankie, I just want you there. You're the only thing that's ever made sense." Frankie blinked quickly, her throat tight. Her voice was softer when she answered. "I spent most of my life convincing myself I wasn't meant for anything lasting. But every time I tried to run, you found a way to meet me where I was without asking me to change. I don't know how to promise forever, but I do know I'll fight for you, for us, every single day." The applause was immediate when they kissed, but Frankie barely heard it. The only thing she registered was the way Sawyer held her like he'd never let go again. Later, as the string lights glowed brighter against the settling night, they sat on the edge of the fountain. Shoes kicked off, her dress pooled around her legs. Sawyer pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Still think this is insane?" "Yes," she said, "but I like insane when it's with you." "Good," he murmured, "because I might have bought a small place in Florence." She turned her head slowly. "You what?" "It needs some work, but the studio gets this ridiculous morning light. Thought it might be a good place for someone who draws wildflowers and has a thing for Italian pastries." She stared at him. "You bought a villa. Technically, it's a converted monastery, but I thought villa sounded less intimidating. You know you're impossible, right?" He tilted his head. "But the lovable kind," she kissed him again, "the only kind I ever want." They didn't go back into the party right away. Instead, they stayed at the fountain, talking about nothing the way they used to under stairwells and behind bleachers, but now with stars overhead and the scent of lavender on the breeze. Months passed. The Florence house turned out to be nearly crumbling, but Frankie fell in love with it anyway. She painted in the mornings, barefoot on the cool tile floors, while Sawyer took meetings on the terrace or wandered through the village with coffee in hand. They argued, sometimes, about paint colors and the best way to hang shelves and whether or not they needed a second espresso machine. But they never stopped choosing each other. Not once. Her first international gallery show opened that fall, and Sawyer stood beside her, not as a benefactor, but as the man who had always believed in her before she ever did. He never tried to fix her. And she never asked him to prove he was real again, because he was. And so was this, all of it.